news. Football's governing body, FIFA, is due to open its annual congress later, but is facing warnings from sponsors that they may review their ties with the organisation following the arrest of senior officials on corruption charges at the request of the United States. Russia's President Putin has expressed concern over the handling of the affair, saying it was a clear attempt to spread US jurisdiction to other states and to prevent Sepp Blatter's bid for re-election as FIFA head. This report from Philip Norton.
For Sepp Blatter, the man at the very top of FIFA, pressure is growing. He's cancelled a planned appearance at a medical conference in Zurich today. His spokesman said it was for obvious reasons. While he's not facing any charges, investigations are continuing on both sides of the Atlantic into allegations of corruption within football's governing body. And today, further pressure has come from key FIFA sponsors. Huge international names such as Coca-Cola, Visa and Adidas, with deals worth tens of millions of pounds, all said to be concerned about developments. Visa said it will reassess its sponsorship unless changes are made in the organisation. Here, Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond says there's something deeply wrong.
International football needs to reform, needs to get its act together. There are millions, perhaps even billions, of football fans around the world who are being let down by this process, which is bringing the game into disrepute, and it needs to be resolved.
Whether or not Sepp Blatter himself has done anything wrong, he's been the man at the helm all this time. Do you not want to stop and think, can we really go through something like this? The most humiliating event, to have most of your executives, or some of them at least, arrested when they're at an important meeting. Stop and think whether you've got the right people in charge.
Meanwhile, the former FIFA Vice President Jack Warner handed himself in to police in Trinidad last night. It followed the arrest of 7 other current or former FIFA officials in Zurich yesterday morning. There are 2 separate investigations underway. An American inquiry focuses on charges of racketeering, fraud and money laundering, while Swiss prosecutors are looking into the bidding process for the World Cup tournaments in 2018 in Russia and in 2022 in Qatar. Russian President Vladimir Putin has now backed Sepp Blatter, saying he's happy with the way he runs FIFA and that the arrests are very strange. FIFA's annual Congress is starting today, with members due to vote for their new president tomorrow. Mr Blatter, who has welcomed the arrests, remains the firm favourite. Philip Norton, BBC News.
Well, speaking just in the last half hour as he arrived at the FIFA Annual Congress in Zurich, the FA chairman Greg Dyke said Sepp Blatter needed to take responsibility for the crisis.
I mean, my position, the FA's position, hasn't changed. We still think that what has got to happen is FIFA have got to be rid of Blatter. I mean, Mr Blatter, whether he is involved in any of these shenanigans or not, is irrelevant. He is the person who has led FIFA for 16 years. And now we look at the results, and he must take responsibility.
If you want rid of Sepp Blatter, as you do and as UEFA do, then you'll need to engage in that election. Talk about staying away from the Congress then. Could that position change today?
Well, that'll be for the UEFA delegates to decide this morning. My guess is they will take part in the election.
What is your feeling right now on where Prince Ali stands on his chances of success in beating Sepp Blatter?
Prince Ali was pretty confident before the events of yesterday, so I suspect, I haven't spoken to him since, but I suspect he's even more confident. Of course, that doesn't mean he wins.
Greg Dyke speaking just a short time ago. Now, in the House of Commons, the new Culture, Media and Sport Secretary, John Whittingdale, has been responding to an urgent question on the implications of the scandal. He described the organisation as deeply flawed and corrupt. Well, our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, joins us from the House of Commons. Strong words in the Commons this morning, Norman.
Not just strong words, but I think some fairly strong threats, if you like, to FIFA, with John Whittingdale saying there has to be a change of leadership. Read that, for Blatter must go. Also saying that he welcomes the action of Visa and wants other sponsors to consider their links with FIFA, also suggesting he wants the full Garcia report into the controversial 2018 World Cup bid. You remember that is the one England put in for, but controversially went to Russia. He wants that published in full, not just the redacted version. And Mr. Whittingdale said he was also prepared to consider the nuclear option, which would be for the FA to pull out of FIFA, the hope being that other European footballing associations might also follow suit, and that would crank up the pressure on FIFA. So a whole range of, I think, fairly significant options being lined up by the government here as this whole controversy now, it seems to be, moves from, if you like, the judicial inquiry into a much more political environment. Well, joining me is the Conservative MP Damien Collins, who's standing to succeed the Culture Secretary as chairman of the Culture Select Committee. What do you think should happen now?
Well, in Zurich, two very important decisions have to be made. One is to suspend the presidential election, and the other is to reopen the bidding process for the 2018 and 2022 World Cups. I think it's clear that process was corrupted. We can't have confidence in it, and it should be rerun. And I think the FA and Greg Dyke need to take a leading position in Zurich, along with other UEFA officials, and say we've got to act as a body now to bring Blatter down and to bring about change.
Is that realistic, given that we know FIFA is saying we will publish part of the report into this process, and Sepp Blatter this morning saying he did not believe there were sufficient concerns to warrant rerunning the 2018 bid?
Well, Sepp Blatter said at the end of last year that there was no crisis in FIFA, and now we have a massive crisis. They've reluctantly published any information from the Garcia report. Remember, their first summary they published, almost edited by Blatter himself. Michael Garcia, the prosecutor, said it bore no relation to what he'd written in his own report. Now we're going to see a slightly longer version of that process, but not the full report. We need to see the full report. The only other body, apart from Sepp Blatter and a few other people that have seen the full report, are the Swiss authorities. And on the back of seeing it, they've launched a criminal investigation into that bidding process. Others need to see it as well. And also the government, and I was pleased John Whittingdale committed to this in the House today as well, the government needs to give over any information it collected during England's World Cup bid, intelligence gathered on other bidding nations and the process that could be helpful to those inquiries. Because what the Swiss have been clear on, and the Americans have been clear on, is their investigations are not over by any means. There will be more interviews, maybe more arrests and more charges brought. And I think looking at Sepp Blatter, he may not yet have been charged with anything, but he's culpable for everything that's happened.
But even if it was to be revealed that the 2018 bid process was corrupt or flawed, is it not now too late? Russia has begun putting in the infrastructure. It would be too late to revisit.
It wouldn't be too late at all. There are plenty of nations around the world that have the sort of infrastructure available to them now, which would allow the tournament to be staged. It's more difficult with Russia, easier with Qatar, there's more time. But all this highlights how FIFA have created this massive crisis for themselves. They failed to act on the allegations of corruption. They've failed to address the concerns about the World Cup bidding process. And now, right at the last minute, because of an external investigation, they're being forced to confront these issues. And they have to do it now. And the members of the FIFA Congress, people like Greg Dyke, leaders of the football associations all around the world, they have the votes in the room tomorrow, and they can do something about it.
Mr. Whittingdale said he would discuss with Greg Dyke the so-called nuclear option of the FA, saying, we're out of here, we're no longer part of FIFA. Do you think the FA should go down that road?
Yes, absolutely. It has no choice. That is the ultimate sanction we have, and other leading football nations have as well, particularly in Europe and in South America and the United States. It is the commercial interest, it's the commercial power of football fans in those countries, the money they spend paying to watch football on their televisions, in stadia. That's what drives world football and what drives FIFA. Them allied with the major commercial sponsors as well. If people start to say, people with real commercial clout, we won't work with you unless you change, that can bring them down.
Damien Collins, thanks very much for your time. Real signs, as I say, this is no longer purely a footballing matter, no longer purely a judicial matter. This is becoming intensely political, with real pressure now, it seems to me, beginning to build here at Westminster, which could possibly, down the line, lead to the reopening of that 2018 bid.
Right, Norman, thank you very much for that. Thank you. And let's just look at the commercial side of this as well, because we've heard how major sponsors are putting pressure on FIFA to resolve the scandal before it tarnishes the reputation of the game and indeed, of course, tarnish their image. Well, our business correspondent Ben Thompson is here to explain all of this. Ben.
Hi Chris, thanks very much. Yes, football's governing body is now at risk of losing millions of dollars in sponsorship deals. In the last 24 hours, corporate sponsors have been voicing their concerns about the scandal and what impact it could have on their relationship with the game. Well, Coca-Cola has said this lengthy controversy has tarnished the mission and ideals of the FIFA World Cup. The credit card giant Visa, it said its disappointment and concern with FIFA in light of today's developments is profound. And they say we expect FIFA to take swift and immediate steps to address these issues. Adidas has said it was fully committed to creating a culture that promotes the highest standards of ethics and compliance, and goes on to say we expect the same from our partners. So what exactly is at stake, and how important are those lucrative sponsorship deals for organisations like FIFA? Well, one branding expert told me that she used to advise FIFA and says getting the leadership right at FIFA is now crucial to keeping sponsors on board.
FIFA's going to need some pretty visionary leadership at this stage, and all the sponsors are going to be looking for leaders who are going to be able to bring the real values of FIFA to life properly. So it's arguably the most important role for any leader to set the values of an organisation and then to make sure they cascade throughout it. I think if we were talking about any other brand in this situation, we'd be talking about game over. But FIFA is a complex organisation, and it's a very rare example where the corporate brand can be, as it absolutely is here, tarnished by the association with corruption. But at its heart, it has the most incredible, fantastic product. FIFA effectively owns and controls the rights to the world's most popular sport. It's quite right that these sponsors are carefully considering what happens now, and it's going to be partly their responsibility to take FIFA into the second half here and make sure that the brand turns into an organisation with purpose and with principles, where when it talks about itself as a brand, it actually shows that in actions as well.
Sophie Devonshire there speaking to me on Business Live. A reminder, you can watch that programme every weekday here on BBC News at 8:30. That starts on Monday. And remember too, full analysis on the website on the BBC's Business Live page. bbc.co.uk/business is the place to find it. All the reaction as we get it, crucially, on that sponsorship row at FIFA. More later.
Right, Ben, thank you very much for that. Let's get back to the geographically, the heart of the story, the FIFA Annual Congress meeting in Zurich. This is where Sepp Blatter is meant to be elected for a fifth term. Our correspondent Imogen Folks is there. So, Imogen, I mean, how is this building up then?
Is it one? Can it come off the
Well, we're all here waiting to see if the chief, the big boss of football, Sepp Blatter, is going to turn up as scheduled for the opening of the FIFA Congress. He is due to be here, this building behind me, in 3 or 4 hours' time. But significantly, he didn't turn up for the meeting of FIFA's medical committee. Now, normally he is at that. He didn't come to that this morning. Now, possibly he is planning his strategy, maybe even tweaking the speech he was due to make this afternoon in light of these incredibly dramatic events over the last 24 hours. But we are told he is going to turn up. If he doesn't, I think that will be very significant as regards his future. If he does, which I'd say is still the more likely, everybody is going to be listening very hard to what he has to say. Looking at his body language too, he's normally a very ebullient man, and I think perhaps a lot of the people here, and certainly his critics among the European footballing nations, will be looking for at least a measure of humility.
Imogen, thank you very much for now. Back with you later, obviously.
Urgent question, Mr. Stephen Phillips.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend make a statement as to the implications for the Football Association and the home nations of the indictment preferred against certain FIFA officials by the Department of Justice in the United States and the criminal proceedings opened by the Attorney General of Switzerland?
The Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, Mr. John Whittingdale.
Mr. Speaker, the arrests that took place in Zurich yesterday, along with the statements released both by the US Department of Justice and the Swiss Attorney General, were shocking in both their scale and scope. However, they were also far from surprising. Anyone who has spent any time looking at FIFA, as indeed the Select Committee did during the last Parliament, will know that this is merely the latest sorry episode which suggests that FIFA is a deeply flawed and corrupt organisation. These revelations have shown how important it is for sports bodies to uphold the highest standards of governance, transparency and accountability. That is what we ask and expect of all our own domestic sports bodies in the UK. International bodies should be no different, and that is particularly true for an organisation like FIFA, an organisation that should be the guardian of the world's most popular sport, not one whose members seek to profit personally from the passion of the game's fans. I welcome the investigations that are now underway into the allegations of bribery and corruption, and I fully support the Football Association's position that significant and wide-ranging reforms are urgently needed at the very top of FIFA, including a change in its leadership. I also welcome the statement from UEFA, who have called for a postponement of the election, and indeed the statement from Visa this morning. It is important that other sponsors reflect on their links to FIFA and consider following Visa's lead. My honourable friend, the Minister for Sport, will be writing to her European counterparts later today, setting out our concerns and seeking their support for change. Mr. Speaker, finally, I would also like to pay tribute to the Insight team of the Sunday Times, without whose investigations many of these allegations may never have come to light. Football is the world's game, and it is our national game. It is a fundamental part of British life and culture. Yet these revelations have dragged the game's reputation into the mud. The time has clearly come for change, and we will offer whatever support is necessary to the Football Association to see that change realised.
Mr. Stephen Phillips.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for that answer and indeed for coming to the House this morning to answer this question. Now, Mr. Speaker, football is, as my right honourable friend says, our national game. It's the most played and watched sport in the United Kingdom and worldwide, and the whole House will share my right honourable friend's concerns that following the events of yesterday, under the failed leadership of Sepp Blatter, FIFA has again let down fans across Britain and across the world. Given that, can he tell the House what discussions he is having with the home nation associations in relation to the scandal which is unfolding, and which it is clear from the charges brought against FIFA officials in the United States reveals a pattern of corruption which has existed over decades? Does he think, as seems to be obvious to everyone except Sepp Blatter, that the election of a new president of FIFA should not now go ahead this week? What steps will he take in conjunction with the home nations to ensure that the election does not take place and that FIFA has the opportunity to elect a president who can rid it of corruption and lead the organisation through what is undoubtedly the worst scandal in its history? Can he assure football fans across this country that his department will make the reform of FIFA a top priority so that the organisation serves football worldwide and does not exist merely to line the pockets of its own officials? Now, Mr. Speaker, although I doubt my right honourable friend has yet read the 161-page indictment preferred by the US Attorney General, he will know from his work on the Select Committee in the last Parliament that the English FA made an unsuccessful bid for the 2018 World Cup, which cost something in the region of £19 million. That bid, of course, had the backing of His Royal Highness Prince William of Wales and of David Beckham, amongst others, but it received only 2 votes. What investigations does he now intend to carry out to examine whether that bid failed due to bribery and corruption on the part of FIFA officials? Will he discuss with the English Football Association the steps which can now be taken to recover the £19 million which was wasted and which could have gone on grassroots community football in this country? Can he say what steps the government will now take to recover any money which it wasted on the failed bid? And does he think, as many members no doubt do, that the bidding process for the 2018 and 22 World Cup should now be reopened? Now, Mr. Speaker, some at least of the criminal behaviour which founds the US indictment and the criminal investigation by the Swiss Attorney General made public yesterday is alleged to have taken place in the United Kingdom. What discussions has he had overnight with the Attorney General and the Home Secretary as to whether a criminal investigation should be commenced in this country and, if appropriate, charges brought? And given the scale of the corruption revealed by the Sunday Times and by Panorama as long ago as 2010, why has no action been taken to date? Can he assure the House that a full criminal investigation of any unlawful behaviour in this country will now be launched? Finally, Mr. Speaker, given the importance of this issue to the whole country, or at least to those of us who follow the beautiful game, will my right honourable friend undertake to return to the House next week to update honourable members on further developments and to ensure that Parliament is kept fully informed of developing events in relation to a corruption scandal which affects something which is at the absolute core of our national life?
Secretary of State.
Can I first of all thank my honourable friend for bringing this matter to the House today. I share a lot of the concerns that he has expressed. In terms of the attitude of the English Football Association and the football associations of the other home nations, I will of course be in touch with them. I hope to be speaking to Greg Dyke later, but I'm very pleased that all four of the football associations from the home nations have taken the same approach in supporting UEFA, both in calling for a change of leadership and now for a postponement of the election which is due to take place tomorrow. The allegations that are now coming out in the US Attorney General's indictment have of course been around for a very long time, and one of the striking things has been the reluctance of FIFA to carry out any proper, thorough, independent, transparent investigation of them. The Garcia report itself was not published in full and failed to address some of the most serious allegations. And I hope that one of the consequences of these latest moves by the American authorities is that we will now have a proper investigation which will lead to the reforms which all of us want to see. So I welcome very much the moves already taken by UEFA, and I hope that other football associations will now come behind them. But it is a matter for the English FA and the other associations in the first instance as to how they proceed both tomorrow and in the days that follow it. He is right that there have been calls indeed in this House for the English authorities, particularly the Serious Fraud Office, to look into the allegations of corruption. We had a debate on that in the last Parliament, which was led by my honourable friend, the member for Folkestone and Hythe, who has also done a tremendous amount in this area, and I'm sure that will have been heard and those allegations will be being looked at. And finally, he asks that I come back and report to the House. As Mr. Speaker will be aware, it is DCMS questions next Thursday, and I suspect this matter may well come up on that occasion as well.
Mr. Chris Bryant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Might I first warmly congratulate the Secretary of State on taking his new responsibilities. There was a time before he was chair of the Select Committee, but none of us can remember that anymore. So we know that we have somebody who knows his onions when it comes to these matters. And I join him in the tribute that he made both to the Sunday Times and that the Honourable Member made to Panorama. Some of this would not be coming out now if it had not been for that investigative journalism. Yesterday, the whole world saw that beneath the mask, the beautiful game has a very, very ugly face. Can anyone be in any doubt at all that FIFA is rotten to the core and needs swift and wholesale reform? What is particularly galling is that the value of the World Cup is not created by FIFA, but by the many millions of loyal fans around the world. Football belongs to the mums and dads taking their children to their first match, to the youngsters lining their bedroom walls with posters, not to the fat cats who have creamed off millions of pounds for themselves. So is it not inconceivable that Sepp Blatter should continue in post now? Now that his own election as president in 2011 is under investigation by the Swiss authorities? What investigations have been undertaken in this country into whether British nationals and British banks have been involved? Is the Secretary of State absolutely confident that British authorities have not been rather reluctant to investigate seriously? And isn't it a bit embarrassing that it ends up being the Swiss and the Americans who are bringing this to light rather than the British? Is the Minister absolutely confident that no licence fee money has found its way into corrupt hands? And did any of the sponsors who are now very reluctantly raising their voices knowingly provide money that was used for a bribe? Does the Minister also share our concerns about the 2022 World Cup? Matches will be played indoors in temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius. Hundreds of workers have already died building the stadia, estimated at 62 per match that will be played. Human rights are systematically being abused. Shouldn't Qatar immediately suspend its kafala visa system for migrants working on the stadia and improve all workers' conditions? And what representations has the government made to Qatar on the detention of BBC journalists investigating human rights abuses in Qatar? Now that Visa, McDonald's, Budweiser, Coca-Cola, Adidas, Hyundai and UEFA have all finally raised major concerns about the 2018 and 2022 competitions, should the bidding rounds not be reopened? And if not, is it not time for the major football associations of the world to consider creating alternative competitions for those dates?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I first of all start by thanking the honourable gentleman very much for his kind words. I'm not sure he will have endeared himself to the Father of the House, who of course was the distinguished predecessor of myself as Chairman of the Select Committee. But I am grateful for his remarks. I cannot promise that we will always be in complete agreement when we come to debate matters on the floor of the House. However, on this occasion, I do share a lot of the concerns that he has expressed. In particular, I agree with him that a change in leadership of FIFA is very badly needed. And I'd actually like to pay tribute to the FA, particularly under David Bernstein, Greg Dyke's predecessor, who first called for that and indeed supported alternative candidates. And I mentioned earlier, all of the four home nations are supporting the candidacy of Prince Ali. In terms of the investigation in this country, as I've already said, it is a matter for the SFO, but I have no doubt that they will have heard the calls that were made earlier in the last Parliament for an investigation and will be looking closely to see if there are any laws have been broken in this country. I also share his concern about the £15 million that was put up for the England bid for 2018. I think it is too soon to say that there should be a rerun of the competition, but obviously we wait to see what the outcome of the criminal investigations are and whether or not there was serious malpractice. A lot of very serious allegations have been made, and we now need to see a proper investigation into those. On the specific points he raised about Qatar, I do welcome the fact that the Qatari government have now brought in a workers' charter. I hope that that will lead to an improvement in the condition of migrant workers, but obviously we are concerned at the reports that have been made about exploitation, and I was also very concerned about the detainment of the BBC journalists, which did appear to be an infringement of freedom of the press, and since this is a matter, as I said earlier, where the freedom of the press has played a vital part in exposing the wrongdoing within FIFA, it just reinforces the principle of why the freedom of the press matters so much. But I entirely agree with him that these are very serious matters which do need to be investigated quickly, and we will give every support that we can to the US authorities and the Swiss authorities in doing so.
Mr. Damien Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd also like to welcome the Secretary of State to his new post. Just following on his lead, could he confirm the government does stand ready to support the Swiss authorities and the US authorities in their investigation, and that we would accede to a request for sharing information the government may hold relevant to the England World Cup bid in 2010, information gathered on other bidding nations as part of that tournament process, and also that the Football Association should share information within its secret dossier that was revealed to the Select Committee, that should be shared with the authorities as well, because that may contain relevant information to the prosecutions of the US Attorney General and the Swiss authorities.
Can I first of all once again pay tribute to my honourable friend for the work that he has done in this area, and particularly the efforts that he has made to assemble a coalition in Europe to press for fundamental change in FIFA. In terms of the help that we can give the authorities, I'm very happy to confirm that we will make available any information that we have which may be helpful in those investigations. It is certainly the case that allegations were made by, in particular, Lord Treesman as the chairman of the bid team team for the 2018 bid, which at the time were dismissed by FIFA, but I have no doubt that the authorities will be willing to take them a lot more seriously than FIFA appear to do. And I would like to thank Lord Treesman for coming forward at that time, and to the Sunday Times in producing evidence, and I would also like to pay tribute to you, Mr. Speaker, for your efforts in ensuring that those allegations were properly heard and the right of Parliament was defended.
Mr. Keith Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with others in warmly congratulating the Secretary of State on his appointment? It is well deserved. I can't think of anyone else in this House who is best placed to deal with these matters than him. And can I congratulate my honourable friend from Rhondda on his elevation to the Shadow Cabinet? I'm sure that DCMS questions will now be box office as a result of this. Can I just ask the Secretary of State and press him on the comments made by the honourable member for Sleaford and North Hykeham? Of course it's for the SFO to conduct the investigation. It would be wrong for this House to direct them to do so. But has he had a discussion with the Attorney General about these matters? Because it is possible for the Attorney to review with the head of the SFO any potential information that could be of relevance to the international inquiries.
Can I first of all again thank the right honourable gentleman for his very kind remarks. As I've observed elsewhere, I hope that my appointment sets a useful precedent for Select Committee Chairman. In terms of the SFO investigation, as he says, it is a matter for them, but I do know that they will have heard the calls today, and indeed the calls that were made by my honourable friend in the debate we held in the last Parliament, and I understand certainly that they are looking at it. I have not yet had an opportunity to talk to the Attorney General, but I will be very happy to do so and make clear to him and to the SFO that we will assist in any way we can.
Mr. Philip Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I first of all congratulate my right honourable friend on his appointment. I hope the other ministers will forgive me when I say that when the new government was put together, it was the best appointment made by the Prime Minister. He should be very proud of the record he has. He should be very proud of the record he has on this particular issue, of the leadership he showed when chairman of the Select Committee. We all know from those inquiries that FIFA is clearly corrupt, and Sepp Blatter has been leading the way in that corruption, and that somebody has to make a stand. If the election goes ahead and Sepp Blatter is re-elected, unbelievably, as the head of FIFA, will my right honourable friend encourage the home nations to withdraw from FIFA, to make a stand on this particular issue? And if they were to make that decision, or if they were to make that decision, would the government support them in that decision?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, who I'm delighted to see is maintaining his record of doing nothing to curry favour with the Chief Whip. As he said, we do look at this very carefully. What happens after Friday, if indeed Sepp Blatter is re-elected, will need careful consideration, primarily by the FA. It has been taken for granted up until now that Sepp Blatter is going to win, but obviously the election has not yet taken place, and elections do not always produce the outcome that the experts predict. So we shall wait to see. But I shall certainly be seeing Greg Dyke very shortly to discuss the attitude of the FA. There are a number of options. Whether or not one would resort to the nuclear option, which my honourable friend suggests, I think is a matter of the FA, but one we will need to discuss with them.
Mr. Nick Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the high numbers of workplace deaths there, can I ask the Secretary of State how the government is going to monitor the effectiveness of the Workers' Charter for migrant workers in Qatar?
Well, I mean, we are in regular contact with Qatar, and we do have a very good and strong relationship with them. I mean, obviously we will raise any concerns that are brought to our attention about the conditions of migrant workers. As I've said, the Workers' Charter, and the honourable gentleman referred to, the Workers' Charter has been introduced, which has been developed with the International Labour Organisation to protect the rights of those. I understand the Qataris are very keen to address any of the concerns that have been highlighted, but we will go on pressing them when any further concerns are brought to our attention.
Mr. Damien Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish this were a happier occasion to welcome my right honourable friend to his richly deserved position at the government dispatch box, because the behaviour of FIFA, not just now but over decades, would make any football fan weep with anger. Would he agree that in the short term, the best and most effective leverage over FIFA comes from its commercial sponsors, who pour many, many hundreds of millions of pounds into FIFA? And could he use his and the government's influence on those sponsors to persuade them to stop spending so much money supporting a systemically corrupt organisation?
I entirely agree with my right honourable friend. I very much welcome the statement that's already been made by Visa, and I hope that the other sponsors will follow suit. One assumes that the reason why commercial organisations wish to make sponsorship deals is that they want to attach themselves to a brand which is popular and successful, not one which is tarnished and regarded as corrupt. And therefore they are extremely well placed to press FIFA to make fundamental changes, and if they fail to do so, then they would have to consider whether or not to continue their sponsorship. It is obviously a matter for them, but I very much welcome the moves that have already been made by sponsors to put that message to FIFA.
Mr. Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, like many other football fans, share the incredulity that Sepp Blatter and senior FIFA leadership can remain in their positions after these allegations, but obviously have been going on for some time. But does the Secretary of State agree with me that the Swiss government needs to take a very, very serious look at how it regulates and oversees international sporting organisations? Not only FIFA, but obviously we have the International Olympic Committee, UEFA, and many other bodies located on its territory, and it needs to take a very serious look at how it oversees both the activities and the finances of those organisations.
Well, I'm sure the Swiss authorities will do that, but of course they are acting in cooperation with the US Justice Department and clearly have taken these allegations very seriously. The honourable gentleman mentioned the IOC, and it is worth noting that some 15 to 20 years ago there were similar allegations of corruption swirling around the IOC, and they did act decisively, they did carry out full-scale reform, and they cleaned up the whole of the bidding process for the award of Olympic Games, and therefore there is a very good precedent for precisely the kinds of action which we now want to see FIFA also undertake.
Mr. Nigel Mills.
That very point, does the Secretary of State really believe that FIFA can re-establish its reputation for being a clean, non-corrupt organisation, or is now not the time for UEFA and other organisations to form a new worldwide global football body to try and have a fresh start?
Well, I very much hope that FIFA can clean up its act, but there is no question that to do so will need a change at the very top. Fundamental reform can only happen if it is led from the top, and I have to say that I have no confidence that at the moment that will happen under the present leadership.
Mr. Graham Jones.
How many British UK companies are involved in the World Cup construction, particularly Qatar? What assessment has the government made of British involvement in those two World Cups, again particularly Qatar? And what is Her Majesty's government's position on the role of British companies in those two World Cups?
Well, there are. I can't give the honourable gentleman a precise answer as to the number of companies that are involved, although I'm happy to obtain those figures for him. But it certainly is the case that there are some very successful British companies involved in the preparations for the World Cup, and we strongly support their involvement and help them to do so. If there are any concerns about the working conditions, I don't believe that those will be in the areas where British companies are involved, but obviously we will continue to talk to British companies and to the Qatari government about this.
Mr. Philip Hollowbone.
I congratulate my right honourable friend on his thoroughly well-deserved appointment and for his statement today. Amongst football fans in Kettering, there will be a lot of concern about the FIFA allegations, because at the grassroots level, Kettering Town Football Club is struggling to find a permanent home for the club, and yet at the very top of the game, tens of millions of pounds are alleged to have been given in bribes. But I think the questions football fans in Kettering would want their MP to ask of the Secretary of State is why has this been left to the United States, which is not well known as a leading soccer nation, and yet there are lots of European countries with well-established football reputations which have failed to take this legal action, which has been long overdue.
Well, as I said to my honourable friend earlier, I haven't yet had a chance to read the full indictment of the US authorities, but nevertheless, as it is well known that the US authorities do take allegations of this kind very seriously, and I welcome the fact that, that there is now to be a proper investigation. Of course, ideally, it should not have been left until the US authorities, or indeed any national authority, acted, because these are allegations which have been made to FIFA repeatedly over the last 2 years, and it should have been FIFA that undertook the investigation rather than sweeping them under the carpet, which has been their practice up until now.
Mr. Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 20 years ago today, I joined 26,000 other Huddersfield Town fans at Wembley for a memorable playoff victory. Will the Secretary of State join me in reaffirming that this issue is really important, because our beautiful game doesn't belong to Blatter and his corrupt cronies, it actually belongs to the fans?
My honourable friend is entirely right, and in a sense that is the greatest sadness. This is a game which generates passion amongst millions of people in this country and the world, and around the world. And the World Cup should be the greatest event in football. And yet there is no question it has been tarnished by the allegations that have been made, both in terms of the potential allegations of corruption in terms of the allocation of the World Cup in both 2018 and 2022, and in the corruption which appears to have been the case amongst so many members of FIFA. I think that for the fans' sake, this has got to be addressed, because it is bringing football, dragging football down, and is doing huge damage to the game that so many people love.
Mark Pawsey.
Mr. Speaker, FIFA has previously investigated itself on many occasions and given itself a clean bill of health. Why is it that previous allegations have not been taken sufficiently seriously, and why has it taken the action by the United States authorities to get us to where we are today?
Well, FIFA have previously promised that allegations will be investigated. However, when Garcia was appointed to carry out an inquiry, not only did the Garcia report fail to address some of the most serious allegations, but it was not even the report that he did produce was redacted and was not published, much to the distress not just of all those observing FIFA, but also Mr. Garcia himself. So it has been the repeated failure of FIFA to take these allegations seriously and to conduct proper inquiries which has led to the position we're in today.
Mr. Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend described the nuclear option in response to my honourable friend from Shipley. I say to my right honourable friend, that's not the nuclear option, that's simply sending in the infantry. The real nuclear option, which would cause Armageddon in the football world, is whether UEFA boycotted the World Cup. UEFA, as my right honourable friend has described, has been honourable in this situation, is today trying to make representations to boycott the Congress and make sure what happens. Could I ask my right honourable friend whether he could send his minister to her counterparts in Europe to discuss the real option of UEFA boycotting the World Cup in 2018, which would have such an impact commercially for FIFA that they would have to take notice?
I would say to my honourable friend, I think he is absolutely right that if we are to bring effective pressure to bear on FIFA, then we need to assemble as large a coalition as possible. And UEFA has already taken a good lead in this, and we will be seeking to other European football associations, and indeed football associations from other parts of the world, to try and build as wide and as strong coalition as possible. I mentioned that the Minister for Sport is writing to her counterparts today, but I'm sure she would be very happy to take up the suggestion of my honourable friend to have meetings with them in due course to discuss how best to take this forward. I don't think we're yet at the stage of boycotting the World Cup, which might cause concern to a large number of people who enjoy the World Cup, but there is no question that something has got to be done.
Mr. Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Because it was 4 years ago that the original chairman of our World Cup bid, Lord Treesman, named 4 people: Jack Warner, Nicholas Leos, Ricardo Texeira and Warawi Makudi, for seeking bribes if they were going to support our bid. So how is it that 4 years later that we're in this position and we're still blaming a corrupt organisation such as FIFA, when in fact the actions concerned are criminal? And why has it taken, it's the repeated question across the House, why has it taken the United States to act when it's impossible to believe that British institutions, British banks and British authorities could have got involved and could and should have done more? Will the Secretary of State come back to the House and tell us what lessons have been learned from this, so we can be sure that rotten apples with big international footprints in future are not going to be left by our authorities because of some the fear that there is concerns within this country that we don't want to take them on?
Well, my honourable friend is right that these allegations have been around a long time. They were made by Lord Treisman to the Select Committee in the last Parliament, and indeed by the Sunday Times, who published a huge amount of evidence which did suggest very serious corruption. In terms of why criminal investigations have not taken place, I believe the SFO have been looking at this. I will speak to the Attorney General, and I'm very pleased that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is sitting alongside me, and she will have heard the honourable gentleman's comments as well. But the important thing is now that we should all act together to make sure that a thorough investigation is taken. My honourable friend mentioned Mr. Jack Warner. One of the things that we expressed surprise about in the Select Committee report was the fact that FIFA dropped their investigation into Jack Warner, and yet he is now one of the individuals who has been arrested in Zurich.